The day I walked into my own mother's birthday party in a federal judge's robe. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just running late. But my brother didn't know that. And the look on his face when the bailiff held the door open for me, when he realized that the woman he'd spent 20 years dismissing was the one every person in that room stood up for. That look told me everything I needed to know about how little he'd ever actually seen me. Let me back up. My name is Simone. I'm 34 years old. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, the second of 3 kids, and for most of my life I operated in a kind of invisible middle. My older brother Garrett was the one my father talked about at the dinner table. Garrett, who played varsity football. Garrett, who got into Ohio State on a partial scholarship. Garrett, who started a landscaping company at 22 and made a decent living running it. My father, we called him Pop, used to say Garrett had real instincts. That he knew how to work with his hands, how to build something from nothing. I was the one who stayed quiet, who read through dinner, who took the bus to the library on Saturdays because I'd already finished whatever books we had in the house. My younger sister Lee saw it. She used to squeeze my hand under the table when Pop would spend 20 minutes describing Garrett's latest job, some hotel renovation in Dublin, Ohio, a new contract with a commercial property in Westerville. While my own news sat untouched on the edge of the conversation like food nobody wanted to reach for. I made law review my second year at Ohio State Moritz. I didn't bring it up at dinner. I'd learned by then that there was no point. Pop had a particular blindness. That's the only word I can find for it that doesn't sound like an accusation, though sometimes it was. He didn't dislike me. I want to be clear about that. He wasn't cruel. He came to my college graduation, he hugged me. He said he was proud, but it was the kind of proud that evaporated by the next morning, the kind that didn't translate into any change in how he saw me. I was still just Simone, still the quiet one, still the one who always had her nose in a book, which in our house was said with a kind of bemused affection that managed to also be dismissive. Garrett didn't have his nose in a book. Garrett was out in the world, doing things. That was what mattered. The thing that I kept coming back to, even years later, was one particular Sunday when I was about 25. I had just gotten my first real job, associate at a litigation firm downtown, the kind of firm that didn't hire many people who looked like me, the kind of job that I'd worked every waking hour of law school to earn. I mentioned it at Sunday dinner. I said I'd gotten an offer. Pop nodded and said, "That's good, Simone." Then he turned to Garrett and asked him about a bid he was waiting on for a new apartment complex in Gahanna. Just like that, I sat there for a second, fork in my hand, waiting. I don't know what I was waiting for. A follow-up question. Curiosity. Something. But there was nothing. The conversation moved on. My mother, her name is Beverly. She reached over and put her hand on mine. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She'd been watching it happen my whole life. She was the one who drove me to the library, who asked to read my papers, who said, once, when I was about 17 and close to tears after one of those dinners, "Don't you dare shrink for him. Don't you dare." She didn't shrink for him either, but there was only so much she could do from the passenger seat of someone else's narrative. I stopped bringing things up after that dinner. When I made partner track at 30, when I started clerking for a federal district judge, when I applied to fill a vacancy on the federal bench, I told my mother everything, every step. I told Lee. I didn't tell Pop, and I didn't tell Garrett. Not because I was hiding it, I would have answered if they'd asked. They just never asked. Garrett's version of paying attention to my life was occasionally asking if I was still doing the lawyer thing. He'd say it lightly, the way you'd ask someone if they were still doing yoga or still taking that pottery class. Like it was a phase. Like every decision I'd made in the previous decade was a hobby I hadn't gotten tired of yet. His wife Donna was worse, honestly. Donna had decided early on that the way to manage me was to be aggressively patronizing in a way that could always be walked back as a compliment. She'd say things like, "Oh, you're so dedicated, Simone. It's just incredible how you keep going," in this tone that somehow communicated that what I was dedicated to wasn't quite worth the dedication. She once asked me, in front of Pop, whether I ever worried I was missing out on the real stuff by focusing so much on my career. She meant marriage. She meant children. She looked at Pop when she said it, and Pop made a sound, not a laugh, not agreement, something in between, and went back to his food. I looked at my mother. My mother looked at her plate. That was 3 years ago. The vacancy I applied for was a federal district court judgeship for the Southern District of Ohio. These things move slowly. There are recommendations, screenings, Senate confirmations, ceremonies. By the time the process was complete, almost 2 years had passed from my initial application to the day I took the oath. I told my mother at every stage. She cried when I called her after the Senate confirmation. I could hear her trying not to let me hear her crying, which made it worse, which made me cry too. Standing in the parking garage outside the courthouse at 9:30 at night. My mother's 60th birthday party was 2 months later. She'd asked for something simple, a dinner at her favorite restaurant in Dublin, private room in the back, family only. Garrett organized it. He was good at organizing things. I'll give him that. He reserved the room, ordered a cake, made a playlist. He sent me a group text with the details, which was the most direct communication we'd had in about 6 months. As a sentencing hearing that afternoon, it ran long. These things always run long. I got out of court at 6:47, still in my robe, because I hadn't had time to change. The robe was hanging behind my office door, and I'd grabbed my bag and gone straight to the parking garage, because I was already 20 minutes late and my mother had texted me twice. I thought I'd change in the restaurant bathroom. I'd brought a dress in my tote bag. That was the plan. The plan fell apart when I couldn't find a parking spot and ended up in the garage 2 blocks away. Which meant I was walking down the street in a federal judge's robe at 7:15 on a Friday evening, which attracted a certain amount of attention, which was not my intention. I was just trying to get to my mother's birthday dinner. The restaurant was the kind of place that had heavy wooden doors, and a host who knew regulars by name. I pushed through the doors and a woman at the host stand looked up, and her expression shifted into something that was professional courtesy, trying hard to conceal surprise. And she said, "Your Honor, the private room is in the back." She knew who I was. She'd read about the appointment in the Columbus Dispatch. I did not know this at the time. I just said thank you and walked toward the back. What I didn't know was that the host had already gone to the private room and mentioned that a federal judge was on her way in. I didn't know that. I found out later from Lee. So when I pushed open the door to the private room, slightly out of breath, robe still on, tote bag over one shoulder, my mother's 60th birthday cake already half set up on the table, the first person I saw was Pop. He was standing near the bar cart with Garrett and Donna, holding a glass of wine. He looked at me the way he sometimes looked at things he didn't immediately recognize, processing. And then the host, who had apparently followed me, said, clearly, professionally to the room, "Your Honor, I wanted to make sure you had everything you need for the evening." The room was not large. There were maybe 15 people in it. Family, my mother's friends, a couple of Garrett's kids. They all heard it. Garrett heard it, Donna heard it, Pop heard it. My mother heard it from across the room, where she was talking to her oldest friend Sandra, and she looked over at me and her face did something I hadn't seen it do before. Not surprise, she knew. Not pride. She'd been proud for months. Something quieter, like relief. I said, "Thank you so much" to the host. "And I'm so sorry I'm late, Mom," to my mother, and I went to hug her, and she held on for a second longer than usual. When I turned around, Pop was still standing in the same spot. I watched him work it out. I could see it happening, the robe, the title, the way the host had spoken to me, the way the room had shifted when I walked in. He's not a slow man. He understood. I watched him understand. He said, "Simone," not a question, just my name. I said, "Hey, Pop." He started to say something else, stopped. Garrett was next to him, doing something with his phone, not looking up. And Donna had gone very still in the particular way people go still when they realize they've been wrong about something in public and haven't yet figured out how to adjust. Here's what I used to want. I want to be honest about this. For years, not dramatic, revenge fantasy years, just ordinary years of going about my life, I carried this small, stubborn hope that there would be a moment, some definitive moment where Pop would see me, really see me, where he would look at what I'd built and understand that it had been there all along, that I had been there all along, that the quiet girl at the dinner table, who always had her nose in a book, had been building towards something real. I wanted him to say it. I wanted to hear it. By the time I was 30, I'd mostly let go of that, not bitterly, just practically. I'd stopped organizing my life around being witnessed by someone who wasn't paying attention, but standing in that room, watching Pop process what was in front of him, I felt something I hadn't expected. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sad in a way that was almost tender. Sad for the years he'd spent looking past me at things he thought were more worth looking at. Sad that he was learning this at my mother's 60th birthday party, instead of over a phone call 5 months earlier, which is when I would have told him, if he had ever called. He came over to me about 10 minutes later, after I'd changed into my dress in the bathroom, after the room had settled back into birthday dinner noise. He brought me a glass of the white wine he knew I liked, which was a specific thing to remember, and it caught me off guard. He said, "I didn't know." I said, I know, he said, how long? I said the confirmation was in February. He didn't say anything for a moment. The cake was being brought out. Lee was organizing people to stand for a photo. My mother was laughing at something Sandra had said, her hand over her heart, face lit up the way it always was when she was genuinely happy. Pop said, your mother knew. It wasn't a question. But I answered it like one. I said, yes. He looked at me for a long second. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what was in that look. Regret is too clean a word for it. It was more layered than that. It was a man looking at a version of events that he'd had wrong for a long time, and just now being handed the correct version, and having to reckon with what that meant about all the decisions he'd made in between. He said, I should have paid better attention. That was it. That was the whole sentence. He didn't elaborate. He didn't apologize in the traditional sense. But from my father, who had never once in my 34 years admitted to having missed something about me, those 6 words were enormous. I didn't hug him. I didn't cry. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't fully okay. Some things you can acknowledge without excusing. And I had learned that distinction in a courtroom. I just said, yeah, Pop, you should have. And then I went to stand with my mother for the birthday photo. Garrett came up to me later, near the end of the night. He had the look of a man trying to construct a sentence he hadn't needed before. He said, so, federal judge, that's like a big deal. I said, it is. He said, I didn't realize. I said, I know. He fiddled with his drink. He said, Donna said she read something about it. I thought, Donna read about it in the newspaper and didn't say anything for 2 months, and then I let the thought go. There was nowhere useful for it to go. I said, it's Mom's birthday. We should get over there. He nodded. We walked back toward the table together, which was about as close to a reconciliation as the evening was going to produce, and I decided that was enough. Here's what I know now, that I didn't know at 25, crying in the library parking lot after that Sunday dinner, where a federal judgeship couldn't compete with a bid on an apartment complex in Gahanna. The people who missed your becoming don't get credit for the arrival. That sounds hard, and it is, but it's also true. Pop standing there with that glass of wine and 6 words of acknowledgement didn't rewrite 20 years. It was just a man late finally paying attention. It mattered to me a little. I'd be lying if I said it didn't. But it didn't change anything essential about who I was or what I'd built. My mother knew. She had always known. She was in the parking garage on the phone when I called after the confirmation, trying not to let me hear her crying. She was the one who drove me to the library. She was the one who said, at 17, don't you dare shrink. I have a plaque on the wall in my office that I got made the week after I took the oath. It says something I heard once in a different context and kept, because it was mine. The work was always real. That's it. No names, no dates. Just that. Because it was. The work was always real, whether or not anyone was watching. The years in the library were real. The law review was real. The late nights were real. The confirmation was real. None of it became real at the moment my father looked across a birthday dinner and finally understood what he was looking at. It had been real the whole time. I went home that night and sat in my car in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. Not because I was sad. More because I needed a beat of quiet after a day that had been loud in unexpected ways. I thought about the girl at the dinner table who kept her news at the edge because nobody reached for it. I thought about how long I'd wanted that to be different. And then I thought about my mother's face when I walked in the door. Not the relief, not the pride, but the earlier thing, the thing she'd had for decades. That steady private certainty about who I was. I had that too now. I'd had it for a while actually. I just had to learn to hold it myself instead of waiting for someone else to hand it to me. I got out of the car. I went inside. I had a sentencing at 9 the next morning and I needed to review the file. The work was always real, and it always would be.